Hi everyone, this is Rayna Templebee. I'm here to share a workshop with you about self-shielding honey pots. This is going to be different than a lot of other honey pots, which you often make as a spell um, to sweeten a situation. We'll talk more about this in just a second. This is going to be one that actually ends up strengthening you, both your immune system and your psychic or magical immune system, and I hope you really enjoy it. Let me share my screen real quick so I can show you some information. First, I wanted to start with contact information for me. So this is my web address here at the bottom of the screen in case you want to follow up with me. If there's something I mentioned that you don't have enough time to learn about in this particular workshop, but you want to follow up with me, there's more information about me, there's more information about my path, and contact information. So I am a beekeeper, as well as being a witch and a priestess. I'm a member of the House of Bree, which is Orion Foxwood's fairy seership tradition. But I've been a witch the longest and also interested in bees the longest. I was fortunate, my uncle was a beekeeper. So when I was a little kid, I got to go to his farm sometimes and help him. And I never really had a fear of bees, and I was really fascinated by them. So now I am finally able to keep bees. So I think for about like the last 5 years, we've had bees in our backyard, just in a suburban part of Miami where I live. And it's wonderful, and I really recommend it to anybody who's always, interested in bees, either magically or just as a interesting way to get in touch with the earth. So for me, I've always also been interested in the magical component of bees, and so it's not important to me how much honey they produce or whether we, keep expanding the hives. It's more about just the privilege of being able to live near them and observe them and tune into their energy more on a really intimate basis. So this is our little paddock in the back, which we leave unmowed for them. And I just wanted to show you a little clip of them in the morning when they're coming in and out of the hive. They're most active. It just kind of gives us a little bit of the energy of the bees. So at the end there, you can see those toads sitting underneath my first hive. They're waiting for a dead bee to get kicked out so they can have a little snack. Okay, so there are lots of reasons as magic workers that it is important to learn about the symbolism of bees, the magical properties of honey, how to use those and tap into those in your magic. And it's actually something that's fascinated magicians in the West, but around the world, but we're going to focus maybe on the Western mystery tradition here, for hundreds and hundreds of years. So just beginning with the Victorians even, there was a fascination with bees and the order, the structure of the hive, the way in which the queen controlled the movements of all the other members of the hive. And a lot of people took that as an inspiration for the ideal magical order and how we would be in service to a higher power represented by the queen, or in service to the goddess represented by the queen, all of us working in a coordinated manner toward a single goal, which is pretty much one way to look at how hives work, right? So the bee, the honeybee hive, the arrangement of the queen and workers, all of those have provided a lot of rich inspiration for magical traditions in our own history. So this is just a little sampling of some of that. On the upper left is the card, the bee card from the Druidic Tarot put out by the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. And for the Druids, the bee is a sacred messenger. It brings solar power to the earth, and it produces honey, which makes mead the most sacred ceremonial drink, and also a very delicious drink that the Druids use. So the bee is really revered as a solar symbol and a symbol of community. and service. In the middle is the logo for the Masons. The Masonic order has a bee right in the middle of their imagery, again, to represent service, as the service to a higher power. The Servants of the Light at the bottom is the order that's run by Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki right now. She's a very famous occultist that a lot of you probably heard about. She's written a lot of books, and they have not only the six-pointed star, but also the hexagram. So we're going to talk about the hexagram in just a minute, but this is more bee-related symbolism of order and structure and service. And so that's where what they're tapping into. And then there are magical orders that are even specifically about bee keeping or bee life, like the College of the Melissa. There are many of these now, but College of the Melissa is a center for sacred beekeeping, where they will teach you not only how to keep bees in your backyard, but also the mythical and symbolic meaning of bees and beekeeping, and beekeepers, like bee priestesses, like the Melissa. So all of this is just to say that there is a rich history that we're tapping into when we do any kind of magic today or spell work with honey or with bee symbolism. And if this resonates with you, it may be something that you want to pursue and look into both the history of it and its use, the bee symbolism in other orders, as well as in your own practice. So speaking of practice, I have been a bee priestess for maybe 10 years now. And it's just something I decided to do, just to call myself a bee priestess. There were no schools of bee priestessing at that time, but I was always very called to work with bees. And then being a pagan and a witch, I was always very interested in our own pagan history of working with bees. And so I came across the mysteries of the Melissa, who were bee priestesses, and then with their drumming traditions and shamanic traditions, and created a series of workshops around that, and shared those over the years. And I always have this really tremendous response from people, that even folks who just sort of stumble into the workshops without having had a lifelong interest in bees, it just really resonates. I think this is an important part of working with bee energy in your magic, is that humans and bees have lived cooperatively for 1,000 years, maybe longer. For a very long time, humans have been collecting European bee honey and also the honey of other bees around the world. And the bees have been adapting to that, and humans have been adapting to the bees. And so we've really kind of co-evolved. And especially with the European honeybee, which is the one that probably most of you are familiar with, that species is very, very familiar with humans and the energy of humans. It's very accustomed to it, and that's why it's relatively straightforward to become a beekeeper. Wild bees, different species of bees, bees that don't interact with humans as much or haven't over hundreds and hundreds of years, can be much more standoffish and much more private, like a lot of insects are. But in my experience, and that I would think of a lot of other pagans who are also beekeepers, the European honeybee is really very friendly and familiar with human energy. So just to say a little bit more about the hexagram too. So the cells of a honeycomb are made in hexagon shape, and this has fascinated humans for a very, very long time, really since the ancient Greeks. The Pythagoreans meditated on the symbol of the hexagram, and it as a representation of the perfect order of nature. So the hexagram is the six-sided cell of a honeycomb, and it is considered the most efficient shape in the universe in terms of using all space. It's structurally very strong. It is equal. The ancient Greeks were the first to measure the 60-degree angle and the intersection of the lines. If you draw them between those angles, create more 60-degree angles. There's a lot to meditate on in terms of the hexagram. Also, the hexagram, if you connect the corners of it, creates two intersecting triangles, right? The six-pointed star. And this has a lot of symbolism in magic and occultism of as above, so below, the two triangles meeting each other. It's not a very good triangle, but you know what I mean, one above and one below. It also can represent the union of male and female. It can represent earth and sky, or or the heavens as well as the earth, and the joining of those energies together, which is the work of a priestess or a priest. So lots and lots of meaning to hexagrams and in terms of sacred geometry. And I'll just move myself out of the way here so we can look at those in case you want to read that text. But basically the six-pointed star is another whole component of bee magic that is really, really important. So I didn't quite mention this before, but in addition to all these formal magical orders like the Servants of the Light, the Masons, etc., there is also a whole tradition of bee shamanism, which is really growing now and kind of being revived by Westerners, even though it's also practiced in other parts of the world. So other cultural traditions have maintained their bee shamanism. And here in the West, we're kind of recreating it as we are with so many of our lost traditions. And bee shamanism is really taking spiritual inspiration from the life and activities of the bee. So this includes everything from observing bees and trying to fly like a bee in its path, like follow its path from flower to hive, meditating on service to the queen and understanding that connection as a connection to your higher power. And even to the point of ingesting honey in a sacred manner, ingesting pollen in a sacred manner, or propolis or some of the other products that bees make. And then finally to using bee stings to alter your consciousness. Right? So this is something that bee stings have a wide variety of uses. Some bee shamans use them to enter an altered state of consciousness, of communion with the bee spirit, and other people use them for medicinal purposes. So you may have heard about bee venom therapy, which is a whole exciting new area of treatment for certain things like Lyme disease and other autoimmune disorders. This is a whole another workshop to talk about bee venom therapy, but it's just to mention it, to say there are so many different potent aspects of bees and working with bees and the human bee connection that really add to your magic. And that's why we're going over all of this right now, is so that when you do create the honey pot spell that I'm going to help you with later, you have all of this sort of background information to help inform what you're doing. The more you can kind of learn about the history of the tradition you're doing, or the different components and aspects of the spell you're doing, the more energy you bring to it, right? The more emotional connection you might have to it. And emotion really is what powers magic. All right, so another important component of making a honey pot is the honey itself, right? And honey is a really magical substance. So a lot of you, I'm sure, already know that it's quite nutritious for us. I mean, it might not be fair to call it nutritious in the sense that sugar is always a little bit hard for our bodies, but if you're going to consume sugar, honey is definitely more nutritious. And this is because it often has micronutrients in it. So if you are getting raw honey from a local beekeeper, then you're getting little bits and pieces of pollen and plant matter that the bees have collected, and all kinds of other nutrients that are in the honey that haven't been removed during pasteurization. Pasteurization is fine, and certainly you should never feed raw honey to an infant or to anybody under the age of 2. I think those are the current guidelines. But for adults, we can usually process raw honey just fine. And in fact, there's a lot of immune boosting qualities to it that I know certain people use with immune compromised children. So there are lots of different kinds of honey. Unfortunately, a lot of the honey that you buy at the grocery store, what's going to be your cheapest option at the grocery store, is actually diluted with corn syrup. So you want to try and avoid that, right? Unless you're doing a spell that really needs that corn energy. If you want honey, you probably need to look at the bottle and read and make sure that it hasn't been diluted. If you're buying it from a local beekeeper or a farmer's market or something like that, you're probably going to be fine. But if you are going to the grocery store, just read the bottles and buy the best honey you can buy. So my opinion on magical ingredients for spells like a honey pot is just go with the best you can. Don't overextend yourself. It does nobody any good, especially you and your magic, to go into debt in order to create a spell. So you could go online and find fancy organic Manuka honey from Hawaii that's $150 an ounce. But if that's not in your budget, even with the best of intentions to make your spell powerful, you are undermining your own success. So in any material that you're looking for this particular spell or in the future, it's my advice to just go with the best quality you can, maybe something that has passed through fewer hands, right? So if you can get your honey from the beekeeper or from somebody at a farmer's market who's selling it from a beekeeper, that means that honey has touched fewer people, and your energy will have a bigger imprint on it when you touch it. There's a basic magical principle that any things that touch are permanently connected. Right? And some of us struggle with that in our lives because that means that we're always connected to other things that we might not want to be. But it is a fundamental magical principle of magic, and you have to work with that, and helps you be mindful of who you do come into contact with. So with magical ingredients, whether it's the honey that you're going to use or the other components of the spell, the fewer hands that it's passed through, the better. Just makes it a little bit cleaner. Okay, now back to honey. So one of the things that's really cool about honey is honey has all kinds of protective powers on its own. It's antibacterial, it's antifungal, it's a natural preservative. This is why what you add to your honey pot, as long as it's not liquid, will never rot. You don't really have to worry about the organics spoiling the honey. Honey pots, I have honey pots that are 15 years old. They're full of like herbs and cinnamon and stuff, and they're fine. So honey is really powerful in that way. I mean, it's a preservative, a natural preservative. It has all kinds of powers of its own. And it also comes in lots of different types. So this lower image is just an example I found online of a honey sampler, you know, mostly to illustrate to you that one thing you can do when you're making honey pots is tune into the type of honey you want to use. So the different colors of honey result from the kind of pollen that the bees had access to. In my backyard, the bees are everywhere, and they're going mostly to wildflowers and also to this one great big tree we have. And the honey ends up very dark because of that. It's the wildflowers, it's the pollen of those guys, and it's a mixture of things. So wildflower honey is often quite dark. Clover honey, if bees are left on a field, a huge field of clover honey is very light colored because the pollen of the clover is very light, and the bees are feeding off a single plant, which makes it more consistent. Okay, so you can see on the bottom here that there's this big range, and one of the things, if you're interested in color and incorporating color into your magic, is you might want to choose a honey that has a particular kind of color shade, like a darker or a lighter honey. Or you might want to choose a honey that's made from a certain kind of plant. So if you know, it's very common to be able to find orange blossom honey or clover honey, and those have different energies, right? So you might want to experiment. If this resonates with you, you might want to experiment with these different kinds of honey and see which one really kind of feels like, just, you know, by eating it, by having it on your altar, meditating with it, and decide which one really feels right for what you're trying to do. Clover is a light, happy, sort of summery, springy kind of energy. Orange blossoms a little bit more intense, very passionate. You remember how strong they smell when an orange tree is blooming. Wildflowers a little bit more wild and you know, a little bit of everything kind of energy. Those can all be incorporated into your honey pot and as another layer of meaning and energy that you're adding to it, and that just strengthens the spell. Okay, now to the shielding part of the workshop. Many of you probably have a practice that includes cleansing yourself or grounding. And I wanted to give this workshop at this particular moment in time because things are very crazy in our world right now. Things are very stressful. As people with the spiritual practice, like most all pagans, I think, would agree that they have a spiritual practice, we are drawing on our spiritual traditions even more to make it through these crazy times. We are using everything we can to stay healthy, to keep our families healthy, to prevent COVID from doing more damage. We're praying for the dead and those who have passed. So there's a lot of spiritual work going on and a lot of stress. And so anything we can do to help strengthen ourselves is important. And this particular spell that we're going to do today is something meant specifically to strengthen magic workers and keep us strong, keep our immune system strong, keep our psychic immune system strong as well. Right? So probably those of you who are here and have a spiritual path are also being called on by other people, maybe members of your family or your community or your co-workers, to be strong and centered during this time. And I think we need to honor the fact that in addition to ministering to ourselves, we are also ministering to our communities because we have a bigger toolkit than a lot of people in our culture. We have community, we have magic that we can do. We have a relationship with higher powers, with deities, with guardian spirits, with ancestors, all of whom support us and uphold us during these crazy times. So it's really important for you to take care of yourself, not just to keep yourself healthy, which is reason enough, but also because we are actually helping others so much right now and helping keep them healthy. And that is sacred work for sure. Okay, so what I wanted to say here is that during these very stressful and crazy times, it is even more important to remain committed to these basic practices that hopefully everybody is doing. And if you aren't, it's, just give it a try. See how you feel if you try these things more often. So cleansing is the first step. There are lots of different ways. I'm sure all of you have a different form of cleansing that you do. Some people use smoke. Some people use holy water, blessed water. Some people do cleansings as they're physically showering. They're also doing a psychic cleansing. So many different ways to cleanse. And this isn't a workshop about that, so I'm not going to go into too many more, but just to underscore how important it is to keep doing this. Shielding is like the next step. And actually you can do these three things in any order that works for you. There's no rigid dogma on this. This is just what I'm suggesting, but if it works for you to do them in different order, more power to you. Shielding is strengthening our psychic immune system. Let's say it. Let's define it that way this time. Okay. So the image here is meant to give you like a super model for standing in the middle of a hexagram at the point where the two triangles are intersecting and drawing in on that energy. And what you're doing with shielding is extending out into your aura, strengthening energy, clear, clean. You've just done your cleansing, energy that keeps you centered, keeps you calm, and keeps some of the negativity from coming in at you, right? So it doesn't create a barrier in the sense that nothing can reach you, but it does strengthen the barriers that you normally have in your aura. And so most of us as pagans are working a lot to be open to the energies of the world around us. We want to be able to feel energy. We communicate with animals and our pets, and we speak with plants, and we feel so much because we're so empathic, and we've developed those skills very deliberately, and more power to us. We're awesome. But in times like this, where there's so many people stressed and there's this terrible virus spreading everywhere, we need to maybe tamper those down just a little bit, not work on being so open as to work on also being contained, to be able to control that, right? So shielding is what we do. It's a conscious decision to have a container around us, keeps our energy in, keeps other energy out. You can always take those down later when you're with somebody that you feel completely safe with in a situation where you want to be open in ritual or something. But for now, I want you to try and think about this practice. If you aren't already doing it, just give it some thought, really strengthening those shields. Okay. And then the third thing is grounding. And that's where we reconnect to the mother, right? We've removed whatever dross is around us. We've strengthened our own container. And now we're plugging back into source. And I know a lot of you are doing this already all the time, but these three things go together well. So that's why I wanted to mention all of them, right? So by grounding, it can be connecting to the earth through a deliberate meditation. It can be doing altar work where you're speaking with your deities, your gods. It can be lots of different forms, working with stones, sitting with your kitties and petting them. I mean, we ground in lots of different ways, but now is the time to be doing it deliberately. Okay, So let's get into actually working on the spell. Here's the ingredients you're going to need. This is what I'm going to use, okay? So a little bottle of honey. I happen to have a very cute little bottle, and I happen to have some of my own honey from my backyard, bees. So that's super cool. Does not matter what the bottle is, does not matter what the honey is exactly. If you choose for it to matter, it will matter. So be at peace with whatever it is you choose. If you like a certain kind of honey or you have a certain bottle you want, that's fantastic. I'm going to show you some of my other honey pots in just a second. Very, very simple, basic honey from the grocery store kind of honey pots. So this is just what we have today. We're also going to use a piece of rosemary. I hope you guys are all growing rosemary. Rosemary is like one of the best protection herbs out there, and it's easy to grow. You have it in a container. It doesn't need to be in the ground. You don't need a lot of property to have a rosemary. It smells amazing. Just always smells great. Put it in your cooking, put it in your magical spells, your incense, everything. It's always protective. It's cleansing. It just feels fresh and strong, very, very potent. We're also going to use a piece of black tourmaline. And this is a piece I've had for a while. I'm going to use it because I know I'm going to get it back at the end of this spell, as I will explain in a minute. But really, you can use any black stone, okay? This is another point at which I don't want you to get tripped up not being able to go out to your favorite magical store because it's COVID and you don't have a black tourmaline already, and so you can't do the spell. We're going to have none of that. We have to be creative at these times. Any black stone will do. If you have a piece of jet, a piece of obsidian, a piece you're not even sure what it is exactly, but you know it's a stone and you know it's black, that's great. And failing that, a pebble from your backyard that feels like earth to you, right? The reason we're using black tourmaline is because tourmaline is actually really good at removing negative energy, right? So some people will use it to actually like wipe themselves down as a form of cleansing. Other people carry it just to absorb negative energy that they come into contact with. So its superpower is related to protection. But all the black stones do something like this. They all strengthen and protect you. And that's why even if you don't have one of these black stones, a tourmaline, a jet, obsidian, you can use any stone that says strength, earth, groundedness, protection. You can go out in your yard and talk to the stones and find something like that. Right? Again, we have to be creative right now. And then the third thing is this little seashell. Okay, this is just a shell I picked up at the beach. It's a little bit extra pretty, but it's just a shell, right? Again, I didn't have to have any money exchange hands or go to the shop or anything. Stuff you find sometimes the most potent magical materials. The reason we're using the shell is, first of all, shells are very, very protective. Just look at it. It's a little clam shell for a little soft, squishy mollusk that used to live in here. And this was its protective house, right? So one half of its protective house. So you can't get much more clear than that in terms of the symbolism of protection than a shell. But more importantly, one of the aspects that we tap into when we make honey pots is the energy of Oshun. And I'm not going to talk a huge amount about the Orisha, but I will give you a little bit more background in just a second. But Oshun is the Orisha of honey and sweet water, meaning like rivers. Her sister is Yamaya, who is the Orisha of the ocean and salt water. And those two are besties. They are so close. And it really, really works to combine their energies for this spell, okay? When Oshun is being the life of the party and entertaining everyone with her beauty, Yamaya is at home watching the kids. Okay, so they are partners. And on top of that, Yamaya, as the mother of us all, wants us to be safe, wants us to be protected and comfortable and feel supported, right? So she's very nurturing in that sense. So that's the other reason for including the shell. Other things in this image are just my rattle and a really cool little beeswax bee candle I have burning while we're making this spell. You can incorporate other things if you'd like. You don't have to have a cute little bee candle. Again, this is just what I kind of had on hand and wanted to bring to you to share with you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about honey pots. Here's a photo on the right of my Oshun altar. It's relatively modest, and you can see that in the front there's a little dish with some honey. Those little white bubbles are because we had just harvested the honey and there was still air in it, and so I put it right on the altar then. You can also see that there's 2 little bottles of honey just from the grocery store, and candles, lots of candles. Oshun's color is yellow and gold, and everything's sparkly, and, and that's what she likes. So if you haven't heard of Oshun, you probably have heard of Beyonce, and Beyonce is our current avatar for Oshun in the world, which is like, wow, so fantastic. On the upper left, you see Beyonce. I think this is at the Grammys a couple of years ago. She's channeling her Oshun, and she's done this now a few different times. There's a famous sequence in her video for Lemonade that you've probably seen. So anyway, the image on the left is a traditional image of Oshun. And so Beyonce embodies her perfectly. She is gold and sparkle and beauty and power, of the power of attraction, really, of connection. And in the middle, there's an image of one part of the altar of to Oshun of my partner, who is dedicated to her. He's a child of her, so he has a pretty elaborate altar for her. So I just wanted to share with you another image of Oshun. Briefly speaking, we're not going to go into great depth on the Orisha here, but the Orisha are West African deities that arrived in North America with West Africans who were brought over during slavery, and they have persisted in North America and everywhere else in the world, and have a huge following around the world. Basically, the Orisha have been recruiting people for the last 500 years, and their worship is everywhere. When I'm in tiny rural communities in Mexico, I see people with the symbolism of Orisha worship, and apparently Germany has a huge community of people. Thailand, they are truly global entities, and they're basically personifications of nature. So Oshun, as I said, is, in addition to being the Orisha of honey, she's also the Orisha of rivers and sweet water. So honey pots. Honey pot magical tradition is very strong in the South. This is something that we have in particular because of the large number of Africans who were brought forcibly to the US. They preserve for us these incredible traditions from their homeland. And so on the left, we see an image of a historical honey pot from Africa. This is from the 19th century, and it's not, I don't know for sure that it's a magical spell. What I know for sure is that it was a ceremonial object presented to a king, right? So this is in a museum now somewhere. And honey was a symbol of wealth in historic Africa. So people would bring kings these large pots of honey, and kings would display them and then distribute them to people in their kingdom. And so honey became a symbol not only of wealth, the wealth of the land, the wealth of the honey, the beekeeper, but also the wealth of the king and the power of the king to take care of people, right? So part of the magic of honey pots connects to this historical tradition of using honey as a symbol of power, right? As a symbol of bounty and abundance and the ability of the earth to provide for us. So on the right, you see one of my honey pots. This is one that is just permanently dedicated to Oshun. Again, it's a small, simple jar from the grocery store. I have decorated a little bit, it's got some extra bling on there with the coral beads. She really likes coral, and the glitter on the top of the lid, but it just sits there as a permanent offering to her. Occasionally open it up and taste it, but it's doing its thing mostly just by holding the energy of honey for my altar. Here's some other ones. This looks like the same bottle. This is actually 2 different honey pots. On the left, you can see one that has some burned sage in it, and in the middle, there's one that has a key and a cowrie shell and a little rolled up piece of paper. You can kind of see on the, if I move myself, yeah, on the right here. That one is a particular spell to try and get access to a campground, a state park that we use here. And it's items that I have picked up from that park over the years, and some signatures and things like that, all kinds of things that tie that honey pot to a very specific goal. And the honey pot spell in general, both in the historic South as well as the way people make them today, is meant to sweeten the deal. Right, so honey is obviously super sweet, and anything that you put into a honey pot is supposed to be sweetened, made easier, made smoother, more pleasant, more enjoyable. It dissolves conflict. It removes barriers. It creates connections. So if you think about honey as being very sticky, one of the things that people complain about, oh, it's so sticky. It's magically sticky too, right? This is what we're doing when we create a honey pot, is we're harnessing that natural property of honey to our magic. And we're saying, we want these things connected. We want them all working together. And so the self-shielding pot we're going to make today brings the protective power of the black tourmaline and the loving embrace of the seashell, and the protective energy of rosemary together, and connects them through the honey, the stickiness of honey. Right? So that's just an example of other honey pots I've made that are on my altar right now. Again, it doesn't have to be a super fancy jar. I tend not to burn candles on top of them unless I'm just going to use a little tea light. But if you go online and you Google honey pots, you'll see lots and lots of examples of very elaborate, cool, interesting, historic honey pots, where sometimes people have burned huge taper candles over them, and as a way to activate the energy, right? So I invite you to go explore those if you want to look at them some more and learn more about honey pots. Okay, so here we are back at the spell. One of the things to remember as we make our honey pot, so I'm going to show you now how I would put it together, and you can do this in your own way probably too, but I'm going to give you some ideas, is that honey is a living substance. So in addition to its ability to have things magically connect and be preserved and hold energy, it also has its own inherent life force. Right? And so we want to respect that, and we're obviously, as witches and pagans, interested in being able to work with that, right? And this is a gift from the earth to us, from the bees and the earth, that we can harness and use, right? So when we start this process, we have the honey, even if it's a bottle from the grocery store, or if it's the most fancy honey that you've got from your very best friend who's a beekeeper, whatever honey it is, you just want to be respectful of the honey and honor it for a little bit at first. You want to kind of just sit with it and feel whatever energy it gives off, and listen for messages. Very important when you're making a honey pot to taste the honey before you begin. I'm gonna turn off my screen share so that you can see what I'm doing here a little bit. All right, so we taste the honey for a variety of reasons, magically speaking. One is that we are making a connection with the honey. We just spent a moment honoring it, listening, feeling the energy that it has, and now we're going to actually take it into our body, which enhances the connection we're making with this substance, right? We want to be really working together, and so that's why we taste it. There's also a piece of mythology that Oshun was once given poisoned honey, and so she's not cool with bad honey, so she wants you to always taste it. So if you are following the path of Orisha or working with her, you want to taste it for that reason too. But more importantly, probably for our purposes today, is this making and establishing the connection. Okay, so once you've done that, you've had a little taste of it, it's delicious, it's still in your mouth, and you're thinking about it. I like to charge the objects that I'm working with in a honey pot. And I do that by breathing over them, right? So it's adding life force to them. Simple, but If you do it, you'll feel that there's an energy that happens there. It's me imbuing it. It has energy and life force of its own. I am not bringing it to life. I am just adding my energy to it. So we're, again, working in partnership. One of my teachers, Louis Satish, also taught us that when you're breathing on something, you're putting your mark on it. So as, like if you signed it or you put your sigil on it, you are making it yours, which is very important in magic also, to be super clear that what you're doing is keeping this tied to you. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing with the other objects. Piece of rosemary, thank you so much for your gifting us with your protective power. Awaken unto life, remember your power. It looks cool as it goes down in there. Black tourmaline, thank you for being part of this spell, for lending us your power. Awaken unto life. This is one of the funnest parts, when the things fall in. They look cool. I like it. I'm a kid. Now the seashell. Beautiful seashell. Thank you for lending us your power. Thank you for being part of this spell of protection and shielding. Awaken unto life and remember your power. All right. What I like to do with honey pots at this point, when they're just about ready, is to hum over them. This is another way that I'm putting energy into it. It's the same thing as breathing on it in a lot of ways, but it's super bee related, so it makes it special. Right? So you don't kind of only do this with something like a honey pot. So I would just hold it and go. Obviously, it doesn't have to sound great. That didn't sound great. It just has to feel right. Okay, so. So what would it be? Honey pot. Okay, so one thing that's different about this honey pot is that this is not going to just go on my altar. It could, and if that's what you feel drawn to do, okay. But I would like to suggest that you put this in your kitchen and you keep it someplace you see it all the time, which is already a good thing because that keeps the energy flow happening, right? So this is a little battery of energy protecting me, and if I see it, every time I see it, I'm like, oh, look at that cool battery I made that's protecting me. That keeps the magic working. But even more importantly, if you have it in your kitchen, you could put it into tea, right? So you can use this honey. I want you to eat this honey eventually, and share it with your family too. Anybody you live with who you feel would benefit from the protective energy. So put it into tea. You could cook with it. If you need lots of honey, maybe you don't want to use all of it in one big cake, but maybe you do. Maybe you want to make one monster protection cake. But also things like putting it into facials or things you're going to use on your body. I would add some of this to the next batch of soap I make. Excuse me. And magically, honey has lots of uses outside of the honey pot. So I like it for dressing candles, just like an oil. Yes, it gets the candle sticky, but sometimes that's what you want, depending on the spell. If you're doing like a money attraction spell, a sticky candle is great. If that's going to also attract bugs, which it would where I live, you can wash that off, right? Again, magical principle, things coming into contact remain in contact. So even if you've dressed your candle with honey and you have to rinse the honey off because it's too sticky to leave permanently, the energy of the honey is still there, right? So let's see. I also thought about, really that's some of, I'm sure you can think of other things for ways to use the honey, but the point being, I want this bottle finished, okay? Because you can always make another one. It's special, it's sacred, but it's meant to be used, right? The more you internalize this, the more you strengthen your immune system and your psychic immune system as well, okay? So eventually you'll end up with this cool little bottle that you've used that you can reuse for another honey pot. And that's also an potent way to keep the energy flowing and keep the magic growing, is to just keep those tools in use, right? I do have honey pots that are permanent and I'm not opening them very often, but I think a honey pot that you open and use and consume has a very strong message for us about self-care and respecting our materials and respecting our magic and incorporating it into our daily lives. All right. So I think that's everything I have. I'm going to go back to sharing my contact information. Oops, that's the wrong thing. Sorry. Okay. So if anybody wants to reach out to me with questions, or if you're interested in more information about bee shamanism or anything that came up today in the workshop, I'm happy to hear from you. And I hope you stay safe. I hope you stay healthy, and that you stay strong. Blessed be.
That was so excellent. Thank you, Rayna.
Thank you. Thank you.
So it looks like there's at least one question in the chat from Coyote, who says, "Is there a special way to take care of a honey pot once the spell is done, other than eating it?"
Yes, I would recommend that if, while I have a couple of honey pots I mentioned that stay on my altar, I think when you're making one, those are ones that are basically like offerings to Oshun. If you're making one for a specific purpose, like I'm going to get a job, or I'm going to bring some prosperity or into my life, it should have an end date and it should be released. So that doesn't just, get stale. And those, I think, should be released into flowing water, if at all possible. That's the way I've been taught. So if you put it, since it's a honey thing and it's an Oshun thing, if you have flowing water, that's where you would pour it out, and then you would wash it and, recycle the container, whatever you want to do. I happen to live close to the Miami River, so that's really fortunate. We're down there all the time emptying honey pots, but any flowing water that's drinkable water would be the most appropriate for this particular kind of idea. That includes your kitchen sink. So if you do not have access to other drinkable flowing water, kitchen sink is perfectly fine.
Awesome, good to know.
Oh, and would we offer the stones or the other items? Well, I think that's up to you. If it's the kind of spell you think you're going to redo, then you would keep, the stones in the shell and use them again and again and again, and they would build up energy. If it was a one-time specific thing, like you're doing this for a purpose that, has that end date, and you want to release it at the end, then I think offering it might be, really nice.
Awesome.
Like the one that I showed in the video, one of those is for Grenolds, right? So I'm not letting that go yet, because I'm hoping we're going to get back to Grenolds next year. And then once we get there, I'm going to let it go. But this year I did also have one that was for getting the site that we used for Equinox in the Oaks, because that was also a slightly touchy situation. And I found the key when we were walking around and stuff. So I made a honey pot for that. But I totally have, that festival and magical project has wrapped up. And so I released that honey into the water, into the river.
Cool. I'm looking to see if there's anything on Facebook. So far not, but of course I'm sure as soon as I say that, someone will pop in with a question.
And yeah, there's a lot of great images. It was hard to only choose the ones I have. There's so many. I mean, it's very fun to just Google. If you Google bee shamanism or sacred honey keeping. So I'll send that PowerPoint to Pandy, and then she can put it up so you guys can have the images. Or if you want just one specific one, I'll mail that to you. I don't know the artist for a lot of them, unfortunately, but I tried to record it in the file name when I did. So. Thanks.
Let's see. I'm just reading the comment. I like to send ritual to the waste to city water and landfill as a blessing and thanks for the living things there. That was really cool. That would be, yeah. And I think that you could even like maybe incorporate that if you're somehow washing your honey down like your sink, if that's how you're doing it, that maybe you can send along a little blessing to whatever water it touches.
Absolutely. Yeah. I actually do something like that because the Miami River it's an urban river, and it's, you know, it's taken a lot of abuse. So when I'm putting honey in there, or any offerings, I'm saying blessings as I do it, you know, both of gratitude for it to receive the honey, but also for its own health and life force.
Now, would you say that a river is a better place to release a honey pot once it's done rather than the ocean, or could either work or?
No, absolutely a river, because it will tie you into that energy of Oshun. So, and that's why it's any drinking water. So it could be a stream, a creek, a river, or your kitchen sink. Yeah, but more so, I think, like I said briefly, there's a lot of love shared between Yamaya and Oshun. So, you know, offerings at the ocean are always accepted in my experience, but I think honeypots are just tuned in a way towards a different kind of natural energy. And that sweet water ties into the drinkable, you know, the drinking water, sweet water ties into the magical purpose of a honeypot, more than ocean water, which is, you know, primordial and creative of life, but not necessarily something we ingest and stuff. So,
Oh, that makes sense.
Kind of a matter of
Yeah.
magical detail, but I think an important one.
So we have a question from Facebook from Barbara. Any suggestions to learn more about using this honeypot spell topically for pain, say a headache?
Well, there's a lot of natural healing books or websites will have a section on honey. So I don't know if they will go into pain relief from topical application of honey. Maybe some of the other healers who are on this call would know the answer to that. I think, I mean, there's a ton of information about using honey topically for the antibacterial part and the antifungal components, but not so much for headaches. But I think if, you know, if that's your intention and it feels like it's working, then probably just exploring it more would maybe be your best bet.
Cool. So there's another question from Martha in chat on Facebook. I haven't worked with Oshun before. I feel like I should learn more about this Orisha before working with honey. What are your thoughts?
Well, this is okay. I'm not even gonna do the whole preamble. My opinion is, and if this is Martha who lives in Miami, hi Martha. Oshun is the guardian Orisha of Miami, so you can't really live in Miami without working with Oshun, is my experience. She's everywhere. And in her Catholic form, she is even in more places. So that is all to say that she is very present and very much part of the fabric of this place. So working with her is like honoring the energy of this place. It is a respectful way to tune into the genus loci, basically, of Miami or South Florida. Wherever your comfort level is, and I totally respect wanting to know and be, you know, first of all, to be respectful of that tradition, but also wanting to know more before you begin on the path. But I will say, as somebody who's in a lineage-based house of Lukumi, there are no prohibitions against anybody making offerings to the Orisha. There's guidance about not making contracts with them and not asking them to do things for you, but making offerings, i.e. like leaving out some honey for Oshun, or going to the ocean and putting a watermelon in the ocean for your offering, is fine for anybody to do. Because I think the fundamental basis of that is that most people who work with the Orisha realize the Orisha call people. They are very present, and I think, you know, that varies in parts of the world, but like I said in the class, Orisha worship is growing like exponentially all over around the world. So it's important for us to listen to the call when we hear it, right? And what might start off as just feeling like you're being polite because you're in somebody's home, you move to Miami, you're going to maybe leave some honey out for Oshun, could easily also be you responding to a call that's going to turn into something deeper for you. So.
Cool. And she said, yes, it is Martha from Miami, so she wanted to say hi.
All that being said, I'm happy to provide more specific guidance if somebody has a question about what they're doing.
So if someone wasn't comfortable working with the Oshun, you could make this honey pot with like your whatever deity that you work with that's associated with honey too, right?
Yeah, that's what's one of the coolest things about honey pots. It's very much a part of the Southern folk tradition. So you have people making honey pots from the voodoo and hoodoo traditions, and people who don't even know that they're part of those traditions make honey pots. There's a whole bunch of stuff like that out there that is not necessarily deity based at all. So you wouldn't have to involve any of the Orisha or anybody's deity, any particular deity. But yeah, it's just a piece of technology.
Cool. So I'm just going to wait and see if anybody else has any more questions, specifically in the Facebook, because they're, like I said, a smidge behind us.
One of the cool things in the American South tradition, if you look into it, is people will make these kind of pots with other substances. So you can use white sugar, for example, if you want to make something that's going to move really fast. It's considered to be a faster acting magical medium than honey, or molasses if you're trying to slow something down, or corn syrup like Karo syrup. I've even seen people use recipes for Karo syrup, because again, these are things people had on hand, and that was part of the point. And part of the point was to make something that didn't draw a lot of attention, right? So if you're just making recycling an old jar with some honey, it doesn't scream witchy, pagany, magic worker here. It fits right in. So, and that's part of why the tradition has been preserved for so long, which is really cool.
Those things that you can have out that are super witchy, that are like undercover witchy, are always like my favorite things. So Susanna asked, have you used essential oils in the honey pots to add intention?
No, I have not, actually. I wasn't sure. I've thought about it, but I wasn't sure about the oil and the honey. But maybe Susanna has. Probably somebody on this call has. I don't think it would be a problem. I'm just unsure whether the essential oil would still, like it would be overpowered by the honey, or the honey or oil would overpower that. I don't know. I just hadn't really gotten there yet. So.
Gonna see if anybody comments. Has anybody on the Zoom call or on Facebook ever made a honey pot before? Joseph, yes. I saw Coyote raise his hand.
Marion.
Yeah, I have also.
Yeah.
The first one I made was actually the first Turning Tides I did when Coyote did a class. And then I've done a couple more since. Thank you, Coyote. That one is actually permanent on my altar because it had to do with my dad. And my condo used to be my dad's. So it's to kind of like keep him connected to the space and that sort of thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
Totally does. I'm seeing a bunch of people saying yes in both chats. And a couple people look like they've been inspired by your workshop, Rayna, to make their own honey pots.
They've already got a bottle of honey out. They're eating it right now.
There is one caveat. Tanit suggested if you I don't think you'd want to ingest the essential oils if used. So if you're using honey pot and putting essential oils in it, that might not be one to ingest.
Very good point.
Good.
Very good point. And that reminds me of my other usual warnings that I should really have been much more careful about this, because there's been, every time I gave the Bee Priestess workshops, there would always be one person who would come up to me and say, do you have an EpiPen? Do you know what can happen if somebody eats pollen and they don't know what they're doing? And so like bee venom therapy, very, very risky unless you are working with somebody who really knows what they're doing, which thankfully there are lots of really cool trained people. I'm about to start an apprenticeship with somebody to learn how to do bee venom therapy, but this isn't something that you just decide to do on a Saturday afternoon. Eating pollen and royal jelly and propolis and even honey, if you aren't in the regular practice of eating honey, can all have health implications that you should think about beforehand. So, you know, if you have a family history of allergies to bees, or even if you're just not sure, just go very slow. Pollen is a concentrated bee energy, and I've had people have a little bit of a tightening of their throat when they eat pollen, even though they are fine with honey. So I always have, when I did those workshops, it was easier to get EpiPen. So I had an EpiPen around, or I had Benadryl or something like that. But definitely that's one of those things about this particular animal companion is we have to approach with respect.
Right. And Amaretta also is saying that, you know, there are some other items that you might put in your honey pot that might be toxic, so you can't use them. You wouldn't use them in an infusion. So if it's, you know, definitely know what you're putting into your honey before you start ingesting it. Are there any other questions or suggestions from the crowd? Yes, for anyone who joined us late, this is all recorded and it'll all be up live on It'll all be up on YouTube after it's been live, probably in the next day or so. It will depend on how long it takes my little computer to crank through the video and then upload them, and then YouTube to process them. But we'll be posting it, and I'll be sending out an email to everyone who's on the Zoom call and everyone who is on our Facebook. I'll be putting a notice on our Facebook once all of those are live. Any other questions? Because we have Rayna here and she's captive for another couple minutes to answer questions for us.
I'm about to go pour concrete.
Everyone has to do that after their workshop now. Well, it looks like everybody's questions are answered, and if they do have questions, they know either they can reach out through our Facebook page or our emlc.net page, or go right to your templebee.com page. So thank you very much, Rayna. Yay!
Thank you.